Service with Haber and Martinez. You may notice that Martinez is not here today, but I do have Mr. Jason Downs, Esquire. Jason is a fellow attorney. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him and tell you what we're going to be discussing today. So I met Jason several years ago virtually on a legal question and answer site that we both subscribe to. And we met because we wound up cross-answering several questions with the same type of answers mechanically, albeit from different perspectives. And because we were so similarly situated in so many questions and answers, we wound up communicating with one another and forming a friendship. And I've developed a great deal of respect for, I would call him a young lawyer, which technically he is a young lawyer, but he's not as young a man. He just started his legal career late. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about Jason. Many of us, most of us, I would venture to say, take that quick path right from, high school to college to law school to the law. But Jason didn't do that. He spent the first decade plus of his post-high school career as an EMT paramedic, and then kind of slowly weaved his way into the legal arena. Very interestingly, he started by being a paralegal, earning a bachelor's and becoming a paralegal, and doing what's called ghostwriting. Many lawyers, this is a little pro tip and a trick of the trade, a lot of lawyers don't do their own research and writing. They rely on other people to do it for them, be it paralegals, other attorneys, sometimes people who have absolutely no traditional legal education, but just happen to be incredibly smart when it comes to logic and research. Jason, on the other hand, has the benefit of all of that. And so he started as a paralegal / ghostwriter and wound up authoring a brief that was a successful brief in the United States Supreme Court. Fast forward to him putting himself through a fast-tracked legal program, graduating law school in 2 years as opposed to the 3 that it normally takes. He's now been an attorney for 4 or 5 years, and he practices primarily out of Melbourne, mostly in the area of criminal defense. His law firm is Murphy and Downs, Downs and Murphy, Murphy and Downs.
Murphy and Downs.
Murphy and Downs. And he's with us today, and we're very eager and happy to have you along. So welcome, Jason. I hope that wasn't too much of a plug.
No, thank you very much. Plugs are always welcome and appreciated. So thank you.
Excellent. So let's tell the folks what we're going to talk about today. I've entitled this episode number 58 of At Your Service, quote, "Resisting Arrest, How It Can Concurrently Be Both Necessary and a Very Bad Idea." And it came to me from watching the Tyre Nichols videos and considering the Tyre Nichols case, which is something that Jason and I had talked about. And interestingly enough, based on some social media posts that he and I had gone back and forth on, I thought it would be a great topic. And especially since Jason had a very big victory recently in the area of resisting arrest and battery on a law enforcement officer, I thought it particularly timely and interesting. What I want to do before we jump into the meat and potatoes, and I apologize, Jason, just if you'd bear with me for a moment, I want to kind of give a little background to talk about not so much Tyre, but the squad of officers that took him down, this specialized unit. These specialized units are not uncommon. They started in the 60s as SWAT units. Most everybody has seen or heard of a SWAT unit. SWAT either stands for Special Weapons and Tactics or Special Weapons Assault Teams. And they're employed by virtually every police agency around the globe now. But these other types of tactical groups, the one in the Tyre Nichols situation from Memphis is called Scorpion, and we'll get a little more into that. But they've been around for a while, and I'm going to use a little bit of Hollywood as a backdrop. I had initially thought of The Wire because the HBO series The Wire is one of my absolute favorite, if not my all-time show, and it's broadly based on a true story in Baltimore. And if you haven't seen The Wire, it's just absolutely fabulous. We're going to run the trailer for you just so you can get an idea. But I'm going to fast forward after we do that to The Shield, which is also among my favorite Hollywood productions, and really is a fantasy. However, it's also very relevant to the Tyre Nichols situation, because for The Shield, that was actually based on a real-world public corruption incident involving about 70 police officers from the LAPD. And even though The Shield took that group and really over-dramatized it and created these, anti-heroes in the form of the Squad, The Shield's group, it's really fascinating. But let's just give you a little quick idea of The Wire. If you could pop that, that'd be great.
There are two kinds of kids walking in this building. Stoop kids, corner kids. No, stoop kids. They're the ones that stay on the front steps when their parents tell them. The others go down to the corners. You follow drugs, you get drug addicts and drug dealers.
Get hands up! Get down!
But you start to follow the money, and you don't know where it's gonna take you.
You think I have time to ask a man why he giving me money or where he gets his money from?
The game is out there, and it's either play or get played.
It's Baltimore, gentlemen. The gods will not save you.
Barksdale has 5 out of 7 towers on the terrace.
I'm just a gangster, I suppose. And I want my corners.
These people do not touch the drugs. They don't go near the drugs. The Wire is what gives us Barksdale. Day by day, piece by piece.
Thing is, you gotta be patient. Learn the job, love the job.
Let the game begin.
How is it you always got the whole world pissed off at you?
Jimmy is an addict, sir.
What's he addicted to?
Himself. It's also what makes him good police.
He does not get to win, we get to win.
If we don't have the courage and the conviction to fight this war the way it should be fought, the way it needs to be fought, well, then we're staring at defeat. And that defeat will not be forgiven.
Can't even call this shit a war. Why not? Wars end.
I've been out there since I was 13. I've been straight up, but what come back? This game is rigged, man. Be like the little bitches on the chessboard.
Pawns.
You go a long way in this country killing black folk. Young males especially.
You're always in the market for a good soldier. This here ain't you.
Many of these kids are profoundly damaged. What they've seen, how they've lived.
You older than your daddy was when he went out on the corner.
What he done got him locked up.
It's the message, D. You can't show no weakness. A man must have a code.
You come at the cave, you best not miss.
Thank you very much. So that was The Wire. And again, just so you know, basically The Wire was, I'm going to read you the actual promo for it. It follows a ragtag force assembled by the Baltimore Police Department to investigate a local drug kingpin who was suspected of multiple homicides. As it expands, it illuminates systematic malaise and corruption which plagues various public institutions, especially the police department. So again, I think it's a fabulous show, but if we transition over to The Shield, then you're going to see something a little different, because this, again, was based on a true scandal in the Rampart area of the LA Police Department, where there was truly widespread police corruption in community resources against street hoodlums. That was the Tyre situation is Scorpion. The Shield situation was called Crash. And the LAPD Department Anti-Gang Unit was called the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, or Crash Division. More than 70 of those officers were initially implicated in various forms of misconduct, from unprovoked shootings to beatings to planting false evidence, stealing and dealing drugs, bank robbery, perjury, evidence covers up. I mean, just some really horrible stuff. And Michael Chiklis brings this to life like nobody else. Go ahead and roll the trailer.
The Shield, now on DVD.
Either you and I are gonna leave this basement together, or we're gonna leave this life together.
Mackey's not a cop. He's Al Capone with a badge.
The Shield, now on DVD. Once it grabs you, the Shield doesn't let go.
You want to get off the dead bangers list and learn to play by the rules. First one is, we still make the rules. I can't protect him anymore.
Flat out brilliant.
How much dirty money is this thing gonna be carrying?
Enough for the four of us to retire.
Packed with exclusive bonus features.
I need you to step aside.
I don't step aside. I step up.
On your knee! On your knee!
You've murdered 2 of your own team members.
With guest stars Glenn Close and Forrest Whitaker.
Don't you make me break sweat trying to catch you!
Michael Chiklis.
You're not a witness, then you're an arrest. And this shit is just enough to make you a trafficker.
Own all 6 seasons of The Shield on DVD today.
Thank you very much. So now we've shown you these clips, and I want you to understand that what you're looking at in The Shield, anyhow, are anti-hero bad cops. And I think that's what we're dealing with, in a way, in the Tyre Nichols incident, and to some degree we dealt with George Floyd. But be very clear that this is the exception to the law enforcement rule. I think Jason will agree with me. I mean, I know he's got I think it's your dad who's in law enforcement.
My dad's a lieutenant with the Brevard County Sheriff's Office. I'm very proud of him, proud of what he's accomplished. And, a lot of my friends are police officers. I will absolutely attest to the fact that the vast majority of police officers are good, honest, hardworking people who want to make a safer environment for the communities that they live in. And that's, something a lot of people forget, is that most police officers live in the communities that they police. This isn't like New York and New Jersey, where, the New York cops live on the Jersey side, the Jersey cops live on the New York side. Yeah, exactly. Down here in Florida, most police officers police their own communities. So I do believe that some bad apples should not spoil the bunch. And I think we're, a little bit later on, we're going to talk about some possible solutions to the issues that we're seeing here. I do want to make a note. During The Shield, we heard Michael Chiklis' character, Vic Mackey, there at the end say, "Don't you make me break a sweat trying to catch you." And I really think that holds true with the Tyre Nichols case, which we can, discuss a little bit more. But I wanted to make that note while it was still fresh in my head. I also had another note to make. I watched both of those series, loved them both. In The Shield, the strike team had a business card. And when they do a raid, they'd leave their business card so the gangsters knew who was there.
They were actually, those business cards were a throwback to the Vietnam War, when special forces would use what were called death cards.
Just recently, my partner, John Murphy, is a retired Green Beret colonel. And just recently he gifted me with his team's death card.
And we have them made up. We use them when we get acquittals. We leave these on the table in courtrooms.
Very nice. And, on the backside, it would basically says, you have been destroyed, wounded, or killed. You have to check the box. And then it would say the name of his team. I've actually seen police strike force type teams, these special tactical teams, have their own cards made up. And again, that's something I think we discussed later during the what are the possible solutions. But one of them is to demilitarize the police agencies. Essentially, they've become military units as opposed to community policing units. So those are the notes I wanted to make just based on the videos. But I'll sit back and let you take over.
I'm glad for you to throw in any time. So I think the point that I was going to make, which I completely agree with, is these guys are the exception to the rule. The vast majority of law enforcement officers, as Jason said, are as Jason said. And the only thing I would add to that is really their priority, apart from doing their job, is getting home to their own families in one piece. And the nature of their job is inherently dangerous. So a few things that we can take away from where we're at right now is these specialized police units have existed for a long time. This is not something new. They've been around for 60 plus years. They are necessary, but they are also dangerous. And by that, I mean the adage that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely is entirely true. And so we can look at that, and we can also have to acknowledge it in light of the reality that cops are required, whether they do or don't, some obviously don't, but they're required to play by the rules. There are rules, and they must remain within those boundaries, whereas criminals do not. That's by definition what makes them criminals. They don't play by the same rules. And so the cops always have to try and find a way to play catch up. And it becomes very difficult, especially when you get an over-aggressive cop and you deal with the phenomenon that we will entitle contempt of cop. And I think that that's in large part what happened here, at least in the initial part of the incident with Tyre. So I just want to run over a couple other ones real quick, just so that you understand again that the Scorpion unit, which is the one we're dealing with here from Memphis, that's street crimes operations to restore peace in our neighborhoods. Think about that name. The designation itself tells you exactly what the plan was. The plan was to take a group of trained officers, saturate them into the community, remove the most vicious element so that you can have safer streets. The problem is when you get a Vic Mackey type cop in that slot, you're running increased danger. But again, Scorpion is not the first. In fact, it's one of the last. It wasn't even established until the year 2021. They didn't have it until then. But you've got SWAT teams that go all the way back to the 60s, as I said. You've got the SCU, the Street Crime Unit from New York City that started in the early 70s. You've got the Red Dog Unit, which is run every drug dealer out of Georgia, based out of Atlanta. You've got all of these different acronyms that different police agencies come up with. This is not unique. That's my point. So, and by the way, when you contrast this to the George Floyd situation, that was not a task force. But let's fast forward a little bit and talk about Tyre Nichols himself and what happened here, because I think the timeline of what occurred is really important. So we're going to show you some video in a minute because they've actually released 67 minutes of video footage. Is that correct?
Somewhere around there, yes.
67 minutes of video footage that they've released. Now, there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been released, but we're going to get to that too. Let me just give you the quick timeline so that you have it. On January 7th, Nichols, a 29-year-old black motorist, was pulled over on suspicion of reckless driving in Memphis, Tennessee. I don't know what reckless driving is in Memphis, Tennessee, but here in Florida, reckless driving is a criminal traffic offense. It is a misdemeanor, period. It is not a felony. It is a misdemeanor. 3 days later, after being beaten by police, he died in the hospital. Let me say that what we don't have in this case is any objective corroborating evidence, at least not yet. Maybe there is, it just hasn't been released yet, showing whether or not Nichols was actually driving recklessly. Why is that important? Well, let's start with this. Well, actually, let's go ahead and roll the first video. If you could tune up video number 3, this is the initial approach by body-worn officers after the traffic stop. Video 3, please.
Motherfucker!
You gonna get your ass blown the fuck off. Get the fuck out the car. Get the fuck out the fucking car. Damn, I didn't do anything. Hey, I didn't turn your ass around. All right. On the ground. Hey, you don't do that, okay? Get on the fucking ground. Get on the ground. I'm going to change your ass. All right, I'm on the ground. Lay down. Get down. Please change on the ground. I'm fixing to change you. Get on the ground. Lay down. One. Now. I'm chasing. All right. Break your shit. Okay, dude, damn. Turn the fuck around. Put your fucking hands on your back. Bitch, put your hands behind your back. Okay, stop. I'm gonna knock your ass the fuck out. You guys are really doing a lot right now. Bro, lay down. I'm just trying to go home. Lay down. Man, if you don't lay down. I am on the ground. Put your hands on your stomach. I got you. Okay. Okay. Get the fuck back. Stop. I'm not doing it. Freeze. Oh, shit.
We can kill video here. Thank you. So that's a lot to swallow. I mean, I know we just watched about 90 seconds or 2 minutes of video there, but there is a lot to swallow there. And the first things I want to point out are, again, the basis of this police-citizen encounter is allegedly a traffic stop for reckless driving. We have no video, we have no dash cam video from any police vehicle to show us that there was actual reckless driving. But even if there was, Jason, I don't know about you, but I have handled hundreds and hundreds of reckless driving cases over the course of my career. And these cases never, not once, involve unmarked police units boxing in a civilian vehicle and then a team of specialized unit officers conducting a takedown in that fashion.
I've never seen that, and I've dealt with hundreds of reckless driving and DUI cases myself. Thousands of cases that originated in one way or another from a traffic stop. Even in the ones where it's an unmarked car, I don't see that kind of show of force. I don't see the blocking in. I don't see the running, not calmly walking up and even for officer safety, tactically speaking, walking up to the car gives the officers a better opportunity to ascertain what's going on, see if there are any threats. The fact that these guys just jump out of their car and run as fast as they can to the driver's side door and don't even give the guy a chance to comply. They're just immediately opening the door and going hands on. I've never seen that in any case that I've ever worked.
So where might we see that? I'll tell you where we might see that. There's a Supreme Court case, which has been a real pain in our ass, R meaning defense attorneys, over the years called Wren, W-H-R-E-N versus the United States. And basically what the Wren case was about was kind of a similar situation where undercover narcotics officers had conducted an alleged traffic stop, which resulted in a narcotics bust. Anybody with a half brain knew that what was going on here was these narcotics officers had information and they basically conjured up a basis to come into contact with this individual where they would be able to conduct a search and discover the narcotics that they already knew were there. So Wren basically said in that case, the Supreme Court basically said, look, we don't care. We're not going to get into this pretext argument. That's a bunch of defense attorney mumbo jumbo. If a law enforcement officer, that means anybody who has a badge and a license to carry a gun as an officer of the state or the federal government, observes any violation of law, which includes a traffic stop, even for an infraction, then that's a lawful traffic stop, and it is a lawful encounter, and it is not an unlawful detention. It is not what we would call a pretext, but there's got to be some violation of law. And that's kind of what this initially brings up, that type of a visual for me, right? I'm looking at undercover, unmarked cars conducting a traffic stop. Now, why would they do that? Well, in the Wren case, it was over drugs. In this case, one has to wonder, did these guys know Tyre Nichols? Did they know him? Did they have reason to believe that he had committed a crime? Did he have warrants? There are all sorts of law enforcement tools. For instance, there's a thing called a land-based camera. I'm sure you've seen police cars that drive around with mounted cameras on their fenders that are scanning license plates. Well, they do that, but they also have stationary cameras that do it for every car that drives by. And what they're looking for are red flag hits. So in other words, you know what an amber alert is and a silver alert and all that sort of stuff. These are alerts from law enforcement databases that say the vehicle that just had its license plate scanned was reported stolen. The vehicle that just had its license plate scanned, the registered owner is a fugitive. These types of things that are objectively knowable through a law enforcement database are probable cause to conduct a stop. So you would think that if, let's say, the car that Tyre Nichols was driving came back with one of those felony hits, yeah, I would understand why officers would converge on the vehicle and do an aggressive takedown, especially if it hit for something like warrants or, wanted for a homicide or, who knows what. But by all accounts, and I have done as much research as I possibly can, Nichols was clean as a whistle.
Yep.
No criminal arrest history, 29-year-old father of a 4-year-old kid, no warrants, no open cases, no prior cases, no known contact with the criminal justice system. Now, can I swear to that? No. But I would assume that if that were a fact, it would already be out now, as opposed to everything that says none of that exists. So I guess that's a question mark. Maybe that's something law enforcement knew that we didn't know. But even if that is the case, what happens here and why? So now we need to kind of go into the timeline a little bit more. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have our producer show you a series of video clips. And as each clip goes, it's going to narrate on screen what you're watching. So you're actually going to see the timeline of at least some of the relevant portions of this thing. You can go ahead and roll them. Just stop after each one if you don't mind. No, I'm sorry. Hang on, wait a minute. I apologize. Take that video and the next video and pull them to the end. Let's go to the article with the videos first. That's my bad. I'm sorry. Production snafu. There you go. Start with that. This is some great reporting by the New York Times. Start with the first video. There you go. That one. Up, down. Yep. Bingo.
Get the fuck out the car. Get the fuck out the fucking car. Damn, I didn't do anything. Hey, I didn't turn your ass around. All right. On the ground. You don't do that, okay? Get on the fucking ground. Get on the ground. Change your ass. All right, I'm on the ground. Lay down. Yes, sir. Get down. Please change on the ground. I think I tase you. Get on the ground. Lay down. One. Now. I'm tasing. All right.
Okay. Keep going.
All right. Break your shit. Okay, dude, damn. Turn the fuck around. Put your fucking hands on your back. Bitch, put your hands behind your back. Okay, stop. I'm gonna knock your ass the fuck out. You guys are really doing a lot right now. Bro, lay down. I'm just trying to go home. Lay down. Man, if you don't lay down, I am on the ground. Put your hand on your stomach. I got it. You ready? Okay. Get the fuck back. Stop! I'm not doing it.
So that's video clip number one, and that's up to the scene where we showed in the first clip where he's taking off, and you can see some seriously contradictory things that are going on there, right? I mean, they're telling him to get on the ground. He's on the ground, right? They're instructing him and barking orders at him from all sorts of different directions, crossing over each other, threatening to tase him. I mean, it's really unbelievable. So,
I've actually seen this a handful of times. Put your hand behind your back while the other officer is holding their arm out to the side, with their elbow tense so they cannot move their arm. So one officer is controlling his arm while another one's giving a command to do something with that arm, which is now physically impossible. So officer one that's doing the yelling, who's behind the suspect, is now thinking, well, he's not complying with me. I'm going to apply more force, or I'm going to put a taser in his back, or whatever the case may be.
So, when you deal with an elite military unit, like let's say the Navy SEALs, you don't see shit like this happening. These guys, they're coordinated. They are a football, they're like a pro football team. These guys are kangaroo. The left hand don't know what the right hand is doing. They are completely talking over one another, barking over. And again, I would almost understand if they were dealing with somebody who was wanted for homicide or pulled a gun on them, presented some clear and present danger. But what has this guy done? Reckless driving? Why was he even taken out of his car for reckless driving?
Exactly.
Let's go on to the next video clip underneath that one.
Give me your hands. Give me your hands. Give me your hands. Hey, Mike. Hey, bro. Watch out, watch out. Watch out. Give me your hands. Mom! Hey. Give me your hands. Give me. Okay, all right. Give me your fucking hands. Give me your hands. All right. Okay. All right. All right. Hey, Mike, give me your hands, bro. Give me your hands. Watch out. Spray your eyes again. Hey, give me your hands, bro. Watch out. Spray.
Again, here we go. It's another just brutal video clip of officers talking over one another, officers who are securing him and holding him one way, yet barking at him to do something else, right?
Yep.
He's kicked in the head, he's tased, he's pepper sprayed. I mean, it's pretty freaking relentless. Yay?
The disturbing thing here is, just like you said, you've got multiple officers that don't know what the other ones are doing. They're barking commands that don't jive, and now he's disoriented because he's being pepper sprayed, he's being tased, he's being battered by the officers already. This guy has no idea what's going on. This is a 29-year-old man yelling for his mom. So, I mean, this is somebody that's in serious distress. He's confused. He's dazed. It's shocking.
He's scared
that none of these officers had the wherewithal to just take a step back, calm the situation down, and gain control over their suspect. It's alarming.
Yeah, to the contrary, it gets even worse. Let's show the last video clip.
Turn around. Lay back. Lay back, goddamn. All right. Lay back, goddamn. Lay back. Lay back. Lay back. Lay back, goddamn. Shit.
So you got this guy. Now that, by the way, that was overhead surveillance. That wasn't body cam. That was street surveillance. So you at least have another angle. And that's why I say I don't know whether or not they're going to produce any street surveillance that shows whether or not he was actually recklessly driving. But let's just assume he was. I don't know how you can ever get from point A to point B, even if he was. Again, it makes such little sense to me for that to be the case. Some of the statistics that I've read are that the police gave 71 commands over a 13-minute period. The commands were confusing, conflicting, and sometimes impossible. The adage, too many chefs in the kitchen, comes to mind. And is there another note I had on that? Oh, the other thing I want to mention is that there's no police report that's been released yet. However, I did pull this little nugget out of the news. Let me just read this verbatim. There was a photograph of what purports to be the police report that was posted online by a talk show host in Memphis known as the Cussing Pastor, a guy named Thaddeus Matthews, who claimed to have received it from a source. And apparently Stephen Mulroy, who's one of the local DA leading the prosecution in this case, said that he had a copy of the report and basically affirms that it had the same account that Mr. Matthews had shown. I want to just give you some tidbits from the report. They claim that the officer wrote, again, I haven't read the report, so this is hearsay on hearsay, but we'll run with it for the moment, because apparently the report claims that the police had stopped him after seeing him drive quickly and into oncoming traffic, and that after he was stopped, he, quote, refused lawful detention, quote, started to fight with officers on the scene. The video clearly does not show any of that.
Right.
Sometime around this period, the police report claims that Nichols grabbed for a detective's gun. There's nothing in any video at any point, apparently, that shows him trying to do that. The police report does state that the police struck Mr. Nichols in the arm with a baton and that they had fired pepper spray and a taser at him, but it does not include any of the details of the beatdown that they gave this guy. Clearly, what they claim happened is very minimized as opposed to the video evidence. Despite the fact that Mr. Nichols does not appear to strike back, the police report lists him as a suspect in an aggravated assault, claiming that he was grabbing officers' belts and vests. And one of the Memphis police officers is actually listed as a victim in that case. He's one of the 5 that have been charged with murder. The officer who fired his taser at Nichols as he was running away, during his own body cam is heard saying in his own words, quote, "I hope they stomp his ass." He's not seen on the video in the second location, but he's the guy who misfired his taser and didn't hit him. There's also allegations in the report that Nichols was on drugs. There's no evidence that there's any toxicology that he was on drugs.
Well, and if he was, who cares? You know,
Right.
and again, these are so the false police report that these guys filed is similar to the pro police, anti certain people media that we see just about anytime there's a valid police brutality case. We, for some reason, as a society, look for justifications. We look to protect the police and to shield them from their own bad behavior. The first reports of the George Floyd incident were, well, he was passing a counterfeit $20 bill in a liquor store. Well, he was high on meth and he's high on fentanyl, and he's got warrants out for beating his ex-wife or beating his ex-girlfriend, or what. So we start painting this narrative that George Floyd was a really bad guy, and he, by all intents and purposes, he may have been, but it doesn't justify a police officer putting their knee on the back of his neck for 13 minutes while he's gasping for air, while he's already in handcuffs.
And let me add to that it also doesn't justify a bunch of other cops standing around watching that happen.
And controlling the crowd, where in that case there was an EMT there wanting to render aid, and they were keeping her back and keeping her at bay. So this entire false narrative that these police have tried to paint, to justify their actions, is exactly what we see in certain media. And again, it doesn't matter if he's a bad guy. The cops are supposed to be the good guys. They're supposed to be above that. And anything that happens before the beatdown shouldn't even come into play. Had the guy actually reached for a gun, yeah, then the level of force needs to intensify. I get that, and I support that. That's proper training. These guys, obviously, from the very beginning, they escalated it to a 10 when it should have been a 2. So
anything.
Yeah. So, any of these things that they throw out there to amplify their defense or to try to mitigate their defense anyways is it's all bullshit.
So I want to talk a little bit about resisting arrest because really that's at the heart of this. All right. I mean, look, there's no question that these guys were absolutely out of control. These guys, I mean the cops, were absolutely out of control from the get-go. This is unjustified from the start. If he was reckless driving, fine. You give him a ticket for reckless driving. Here in Florida, if it's really bad and the cops really offended, they can cuff your ass and take you to jail and book you for it if they want to. But I got to venture to say that 99 out of 100 times, that doesn't happen. They just give you your ticket and send you on your way, knowing that you're going to have to deal with the judge. And, reckless driving is not a very pretty offense. It's almost the murder one of county court. You're going to piss off most judges and prosecutors if you're truly reckless driving. Here in Florida, again, cops don't always get that right because they overcharge careless driving as reckless more often than not. But be that as it may, I think that, look, I know it's going to sound horrible, but it's true. It shouldn't have happened the way it happened from the get-go. But once Tyre took off and ran, things got exponentially worse. Was he getting a beating? Was he being abused? Was he being victimized? Absolutely. I don't think he'd be dead if he didn't run. And I'm not blaming him. Please understand that. In no way, shape, or form. I'm just observing this for the next person who might make the same decision. Okay? Right. He could have taken that beating, that wrongful beating, that criminal beating. These cops would have all been arrested. They would have all been charged. They would have all lost their jobs. They would have all gone to jail. He would have gotten a very nice settlement or verdict from a civil lawsuit, and he'd be alive today, and his child would have a father. I believe that in my heart of hearts. Again, I am not blaming him. I'm just stating what I believe to be in 2020 hindsight a reality. So let's talk about what resisting arrest is. And for resisting arrest, I have to turn to my resident expert, myself. Go ahead and roll what should have been video number 5. Producers, roll video. There you go.
Hi, this is Mike Haber. Thank you for asking me, what is resisting arrest in the state of Florida? In Florida, resisting arrest can occur in one of two ways, either with or without violence. Florida Statute 843.01 makes it a crime to knowingly and willfully resist, obstruct, or oppose a law enforcement officer by threatening violence or engaging in any violent conduct against a law enforcement officer while he or she is engaged in the lawful execution of a legal duty. Florida Statute 843.02 makes it a crime to passively, meaning without any use of violence, resist, obstruct, or oppose a law enforcement officer while he or she is engaged in the lawful execution of a legal duty. Resisting with violence is a third-degree felony and can get you 5 years in prison. Resisting without violence is a first-degree misdemeanor, punishable by a max of 364 in the local jail. There are defenses to both resisting with or without, but a major difference is that in a resisting without violence charge, it will be a defense if the officer's arrest is subsequently determined to have been unlawful. But in the case of resisting with, a subsequent determination of an unlawful arrest will not be a defense. In either event, it's always going to be a defense where, 1, you did not know the victim was a cop. 2, the cop was not engaged in the performance of a lawful duty when the resisting occurred. Or 3, while you were engaged in self-defense because a cop was using excessive force against you. I thank you for your question. I appreciate your having asked it, and I invite you to ask me. Please remember, Michael A. Haber, P.
Thank you. So I want to just briefly touch on those 3 things. The first, you don't know they're a cop. Well, these guys were wearing police insignia. They had red and blues. There was no question that they were police officers. He didn't resist anyhow. But even if he did, there's no question that they were law enforcement. That won't apply. The second basis is whether or not the cops were engaged in the lawful performance of a duty, and that I'm going to have Jason talk about in a moment. And then obviously the third's a different. But Jason had a case not too long ago where he had a client who was charged here in Florida with resisting without and also battery on a law enforcement officer. So even though it wasn't resisting with violence, there was a violent crime against a law enforcement officer alleged. The cop claimed that the individual struck the officer against the officer's will, therefore a battery on a Leo. So why don't you, if you don't mind, Jason, just tell the folks a little bit about that case and how it is that you wound up beating those allegations.
Certainly. So just as your very well-produced video pointed out, under Florida law, resisting with violence is never a defense well, resisting with violence or battery on a law enforcement officer are really never defensible, even when there's an unlawful arrest. But if the police officer doesn't have a law, he's not discharging a lawful duty, it's not a lawful arrest. And that could be, you didn't have probable cause to stop you. He's made a mistake of law, whatever the case may be. The police officer doesn't have a lawful duty or a lawful ability to seize your person. Then you have a defense if you have resisted without violence. Resisting without violence, the most common form is tensing. The police report will say, the defendant tensed or turned away from me while I was trying to handcuff him. So in the case that we had, the state court essentially held differently. So here we have a woman who is a colonel in the Army. She was Special Forces still don't accept women, or they didn't at the time, but she was Special Forces trained, deployed numerous times. She's a badass by everything that you could define the term badass from. So police officers show up because there's an allegation that that maybe would support a Baker Act under Florida law. So police officers show up, and there is no evidence that would support seizing her under Florida's Baker Act law. But the police officers nonetheless went hands-on. They attempted to place her in cuffs. She jerked away. So there's the resisting without violence. They ultimately gained control of her, put her in cuffs, and after she was in cuffs, she kicked the officer numerous times. So that constituted battery on a law enforcement officer. Essentially, we argued there's this really fantastic case out of the 4th DCA in Florida. It's called Kirby v. State. It's an old case. It's from 1969. This guy resisted arrest with violence. And what that court said was the issue is whether the arrest was lawful, because if it was not, he is entitled to be discharged on all counts. So, typically when we have a case where somebody is resisted, we're filing a motion to suppress, because, a motion to suppress is usually where we argue that there's an unlawful seizure. But this Kirby case kind of gives us this backdoor way to bring it in under a motion to dismiss. And that's what we did. We followed the Kirby case. We made our argument, and the trial court here in the 18th Circuit agreed because the police officer didn't have the lawful ability or the lawful authority to go hands-on with her. She could not have resisted arrest without violence. And because it was an unlawful arrest, everything that comes after that is fruit of the poisonous tree, essentially. So the court here actually decided that she had every legal right to kick the officer and to do everything that she did. So
when you say that, what you're meaning, what you're saying, and what the court said is she acted in self-defense at that point. Absolutely.
She was acting in self-defense. Self-preservation trumps everything. I will mention that the state, this is one of the few times that I lost my composure and actually laughed in court. I love the prosecutor. He's one of the best that we've ever had here. I'm not going to name his name, but he made the argument that, Judge, this defense attorney is essentially saying that we should question the police. We should never question the police. And I started laughing, and I said, that's actually one of the canons of my job. We should always question authority. We should always question the police and question the government. And that's what we did here. We questioned the government's motivation they tried to backdoor it in and say, well, it didn't qualify for Baker Act, so it should qualify under Marchman Act. And the judge saw through that argument. You know, you don't get to make an arrest based on one theory and then later come back with a catch-all that the police officers didn't even contemplate at the time of the seizure. So we made our argument. We had a really good hearing. We had a really good judge, and everything fell in our favor. The state chose not to take that up on appeal. So here in the 18th Judicial Circuit, which covers Brevard and Seminole counties, right now it is good case law that if the police officer was not exercising a lawful duty in seizing your person, and you've been charged with resisting without, resisting with, or battery on a law enforcement officer, you need to contact an attorney. I do want to circle back around to something that you said a little bit earlier, Michael, and that is, the real advice here is never to resist. We're not blaming Tyre. Like you said, when he ran, obviously, if he had not run, maybe things would have gone a little bit differently. We're not blaming him. We're not blaming any victim of any crime. But my advice to people is, if you've been charged with resisting, hire a lawyer. But when you're in the heat of the moment, you're there, you're being arrested, your best bet is to let the cops do what they're going to do. Whether or not they have a lawful authority, let your lawyer do the fighting for you in the court. In just about any contact sport, when you're a kid, you're always told, leave it for the field, or save it for the field, or save it for the ring, save it for the mat. Let your lawyer do that. Save it for the courtroom. Let us fight it for you. Don't resist with or without violence. But, certainly, we have people that are caught off guard when a police officer starts to reach for their wrist and they jerk away just as a physical response. And that constitutes resisting without. So stop the resisting there. Don't take it any farther. And let us do the fighting for you. Now, with Tyre getting up and running, that's a really interesting part of his case, because I've watched the video over and over, and I firmly believe that him getting up and running was fight or flight. I think it was self-preservation. I think that I don't know that.
Who is it that he even was able to do that with all those cops on?
Yeah, I honestly believe that he had to get up and fight. He had to get up and run. In most cases, I just say, there's no way you should run. But in this one, I mean, he's taking such a beating, and again, with all the confusion, with everything that's going on with the police officers all contradicting themselves, this guy was in serious distress, and I didn't see any other path for him. We can say in hindsight he should have just laid there taking it, and then he'd have this big lawsuit and all this stuff. But fight or flight kicks in, and some part of the self-preservation part of his brain told him, you have to get away right now or you're going to die.
I completely agree with that. So it begs the question of, when are you allowed to use force to defend yourself in an unlawful arrest? And again, I'm going to turn to my resident expert. Producers, if you would roll that last video clip, which I guess should have been video number 4 or 5. Yeah.
Hi, this is Mike Haber. Thank you for asking me, can I use force to defend myself against an unlawful arrest? In Florida, you are never permitted to use violence to resist an arrest, even if your arrest is unlawful. However, if, during the course of an arrest, excessive force is being used against you, you may be permitted, assuming that it's done in bona fide self-defense, to use only that amount of force which is reasonably necessary to defend yourself from law enforcement's use of excessive force during the course of an arrest. Let me restate that. You are not ever permitted to use force to try to avoid an arrest. You may be entitled to use self-defense. Again, that amount of force reasonably necessary to defend yourself if there is unlawful action being committed by law enforcement officers against you. The operative words here are going to be reasonable and unlawful. Reasonable for you, unlawful for the cops. Please be very clear. Using any force against a cop is always going to be risky. Apart from the fact that a bunch of cops are likely to join in and pummel you into submission, 999 out of 1,000 times, the cops are going to coordinate their testimony after the fact to make you look like the aggressor. And just as often, the state attorney is going to side with the cops' version of events. That said, I thank you for your question.
Okay,
I appreciate your having asked it, and I invite you to ask me more.
So it's a confusing thing, but it is the heart of what happened in your case, right? She kicked that cop. That is battery on a law enforcement officer.
Mm-hmm.
But in your case, she didn't kick the cop just because she felt like finding a cop to kick.
Right.
She exercised what she felt to be necessary to defend herself from over-aggressive behavior by an officer. Forget
Correct.
the fact that an officer, it makes no difference who he is or she is. You have a right to self-defense in the state of Florida. We've actually gotten a couple of questions. A question just popped up from George Gonzalez. What can you do if you have a medical issue? Do they have to give you accommodations once you get arrested? Hold that thought, George. Let me just finish up on this topic real quick. Look, that video has garnered hundreds of comments because people don't like the status of the law. And a bunch of them throw this 1900 Supreme Court case, Bad Elk, in my face, saying that it stands for the proposition that any citizen at any time is entitled to use violence to resist arrest. That is not the law. That is not the law. Do not believe that is the law. I don't care how many times you read Bad Elk versus United States. It does not give you the authority to use force or violence when you are being arrested. So reasonable force in self-defense, yes, you can do that. So, had Jason's client taken out a concealed firearm and shot the cop in the head, probably wouldn't have worked out the same way for her.
Correct.
As opposed to taking it. Because the force has to be reasonable under
Right.
the circumstances.
Yeah, and I couldn't have said it better. It's you can match force with force when you are defending yourself against brutality from anyone. It doesn't even have to be a police officer. And one of the things to remember, don't take your legal advice from Wikipedia because that's where everybody's finding the Bad Elk case. There's been a lot of developments in the Supreme Court and the state courts since Bad Elk was decided.
200 years ago.
Yeah. Another thing you mentioned in your video that you showed, that the police will get together and they will they'll work on the wording of their report. We actually had a case from a couple of years ago. This guy's actually still in civil litigation after we got the criminal complaint dismissed. And we referred him to a big firm that handles those kinds of claims, police brutality claims. This guy was carrying a pizza into his house. West Melbourne Police Department did not have the lawful authority to seize him. They were there to question him about a misdemeanor that occurred out of their presence. And as you know, under Florida law, they can't make an arrest on a misdemeanor that didn't occur in their presence, except this wasn't.
With a couple of exceptions.
Right. This was not one of the exceptions. He said, well, I'll talk to you. Let me go put my pizza inside. And the cop lost his mind, runs up behind him, tackles him. Other cops run in. They destroy the guy's poor pizza. It goes flying on the ground. And then their body cameras, they're being so violent with them, their body cams fall off. So their body cams are laying on the ground, but you can hear that he gets handcuffed, and then you can hear the taser deploy 3 more times after the handcuffs. He was charged with resisting. We got that dismissed. That was an easy dismissal. And then, he's in the civil litigation part. What we found interesting was after the arrest, the police were on scene for about 2 more hours, and they were all colluding. And, what you see now is, when they get together to have their little powwows, they hit the mute button on their microphone, and they'll say, muting for tactical purposes or something, some stupid excuse like that. Well, there were so many cops that were getting together, and every single one of the little powwows, one of them would forget to hit the mute button. So we got to listen to them, and the collusion was unbelievable. And I'll tell you, the ones that showed up after the incident were good cops that I would have never, ever thought would do this. I mean, these are people that I would trust 100%. And I watched every single one of them participate in the collusion to help their brother in blue. So if you know, I don't care what your opinion of police officers is. If you think that good cops do not collude, you're sadly mistaken.
I would say
I watched it happen.
Just as a dovetail to that, I would say that it's also equally true that I believe most cops just as soon get rid of those bad apples than collude with them.
I agree.
But I want to make two more points on that, and that is with regards to collusion. We talked about a little bit the police report, which we haven't seen in this case, but assuming what was leaked is true, you know, that's collusion at its finest. These guys, you know, putting what they want in there and, you know, omitting what they don't want in there and yada yada. But what they can't change, what they don't change, is that body worn, and that's what's going to kill them. Body worn is at the same time the single number one best and worst thing that has happened to both cops and criminally accused, because it either confirms or exonerates, one of the two. It incriminates or exonerates either the police or the defendant. So if everything happens the way they say it happens, that's one thing, but it doesn't always go that
right.
way.
Michael, we just lost your audio. Nope. While he's working on his audio, I'll answer George's question. So if you have medical issues, especially if it's something physical, you should don't resist, but advise the police officers of your medical issues while you are being detained. And I mean, you know, if a police officer reaches for your arm to start handcuffing you, don't pull away, but immediately let them know, officer, I have a shoulder issue. You can't pull my arm back. And I'll tell you, anytime I've ever seen somebody advise a police officer of a medical issue while they're being detained, I have absolutely seen police officers accommodate. I've never seen a police officer ignore that and try to cause further injury. If it's a medical issue, such as, you know, heart disease, you know, things like that, let them know right away. And in every instance I've ever seen that, they will ask, do you need an ambulance? And again, I've never seen a police officer act poorly under those circumstances. Once you're already detained, good luck getting the jail to accommodate you. And you need to be careful when you ask for accommodations, because if it's certain medical conditions, they will put you in the medical wing. And you know who else is in the medical wing? The people that are throwing their own shit. So be very careful what you ask for at the jail. But, you know, if you have an immediate issue that requires constant medical care, you know, you need blood pressure medication, things like that, tell the arresting officer, because if you get a nice cop, they may let your spouse or your significant other bring your medication to the scene before they haul you to jail. And if you've got that medication with you when you arrive at the jail, you should be able to get it administered while you're there waiting for bond. So definitely, they should accommodate medical concerns, whether it's physical or medical, and you should absolutely tell them as soon as possible. Can't hear you, Mike. All right, so Michael's going to text me real quick. All right, so we're going to close the show. Before we go, I just want to give this little disclaimer. What we're advising people is really simple. If you run into any interaction with police officers, you need to know your rights. First and foremost, a police officer has to have probable cause to detain you, or at least reasonable suspicion that you are committing or about to commit or just committed a crime. In that instance, you know, just comply with police officers. Don't ever run from police officers. If your life is on the line, like Tyre Nichols was, obviously fight or flight kicks in, and I believe that young man needed to run. I don't like the results that happen after, but my advice is simple. Let your lawyers do the fighting for you in the courtroom. Don't fight the police officers out there. You will usually get a much better result. If you have any questions, you can always email myself or Michael. All of our information is down on the bottom of the screen. It'll be in the details when he posts this video online. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll look forward to the next one. Thank you. See you next week.